You're on, bro.
Alright, if you would, we're going to talk about flowers today. I'll show you the biggest flower in the world.
Yeah. Dude, I'm gonna feel so cool.
Page 668, section 23.2. Turn in your book to 668, section 23.2. Flowers.
And in our office hours today, can you like kind of like give me a little summary on the background?
Yeesh.
You made burn sex.
668, 23.2. Last time, if you remember, there are 4 types of plant groups. They were mosses, which are your non-vascular. And then there's your seedless vascular, or your ferns. And then there's your vascular seed, which includes your conifers. And then there's your flowering, which are your angiosperms. So when we learned about the evolution of plants, we learned that plants went in this order. First came mosses, then later ferns evolved, then later conifers evolved, and then finally flowering plants evolved. And last time in class, we talked about the sexual cycles of each of these 3. We talked about moss sex, fern sex, and conifer sex. You missed that on Friday if you weren't here. That was a fun day.
It really was.
And now we're going to talk about flowering plant sex.
They were animated.
And flowering plant sex involves the flower. The flower is the sexual organ of a flowering plant. It's where the sperms and eggs are made. And so the first thing you have to do is learn the parts of a flower. This is part of your essay here. And first of all, there are the sepals. The sepals are the little green leaves that surround the flower. And often, you'll find flowers are closed. These green leaves close over the petals. You've seen closed flowers, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then they'll open up. Well, the sepals are protective leaves that will cover up the flower. And then there are the petals. And what the petals are advertisements. Colorful advertisements that draw in the pollinators, like insects. Insects just go around looking for flowers. Bees do. And they look for the certain type that they like to eat. Because the petals produce nectar. Nectar is a sweet substance that the insects can eat. So, the bees are just going around looking for food. And they see the petals and they go, ooh, there's food there. And so they go to the flower. Then there's the male and female parts. The stamens are the male parts that are often numerous and surrounding the center part, which is called the pistil. The pistil is the female part. So stamens are male parts, pistil is the female part. Memorize this now. These are the 4 types of what we call, the 4 parts of what we call a complete flower. Sepals, petals, stamens, pistils. Got it memorized?
Yeah.
Tucker's all over it. Next slide, please. Oh. Here's another picture. And it gets a little bit more involved. There are specific parts of the stamens and pistils. Now here in this figure they call it the carpel. The pistil can also be called the carpel. There's 2 names for the same thing. It's like how they call me Mr. Willis and DJ Grandmaster T. It's two names for the same thing.
What? You know that?
The stamen consist of, here are the stamens, all these little things right here, and they really consist of two parts. The filament is this long structure here that holds up the anther. The anther is on top of the filament. And the anther is what produces the pollen. Pollen grains are produced by that. And what do the pollen grains hold inside them?
Spores.
Sperm.
Oh.
Sperm cells. They actually have spores that undergo meiosis to produce sperm. Each pollen grain holds 2 sperm cells, and those are produced by meiosis in the anther there. And then the pistil, or the carpel, this middle part here has 3 parts to it. The stigma on the top, it's very sticky. And the reason why it's sticky is so pollen will stick to it. It's a sticky stigma. I remember that it's sticky because sticky, stigma, they both start with sti. See?
I got you.
You get it?
Yeah.
And then the style is this part here that holds up the stigma. And the ovary is this part right here. And inside the ovary are what's called ovules. Ovules are egg-containing structures. The egg is inside the ovule.
Ooh.
Now, here's the way it works. A bee comes to the flower, bzzz, beep, and lands there and starts crawling around the flower, eating the nectar. And when it does that, pollen grains from the stamens rub off onto the bee's back. Bees have a furry back, and the furry back picks up the pollen grains. So as the bee is crawling around eating, it's getting pollen all over it. It doesn't even know it. Stupid bee. And then it flies, after it's finished with this, after it's got no more food, it flies off to the next flower. And when it's on the next flower, it lands and starts crawling around and eating. And probably some of the pollen will rub off of the bee's back and stick to the stigma on the next plant because it's sticky. And then the plant has been pollinated. Sperm has traveled from one plant to another. And the little pollen grains sitting up here will start to multiply and grow a tube that grows all the way down through the style, all the way to the ovary and into the ovule. And the sperm, the tube is real long, it goes like this, and the sperm are released into the egg to fertilize the egg. Yes?
Can a flower pollinate itself, or do they?
Some flowers do pollinate themselves. But most flowers, what they'll do is they'll get rid of all their pollen first before the stigma becomes sticky. So it can't pollinate itself. It'll lose all its pollen, and only then will the stigma become sticky. That's a good question. Yeah.
What happens if a pollen from one flower goes on a different flower? Does it make
That's
it-
what it's supposed to do. Oh, like a different
Different
species?
yeah.
It won't be able to grow a tube. It'll only work on its own species. Good question.
Stupid.
No, that's a good question.
Good.
Video footage?
It won't make a hybrid flower?
Most flowers don't make. I guess it's possible. It's possible.
Good question. It's a good question.
Usually they don't. It doesn't work.
A California poppy opens to reveal a radial symmetry of its petals.
Cool.
Many plants have this primitive arrangement of flower parts. Other primitive features include petals that are free and large numbers of stamens and ovaries. In contrast, an orchid flower has bilateral symmetry and fused parts, thought to be more derived characteristics.
Yeah, that wasn't very good.
Horrible video.
How about this one?
The unparalleled success of angiosperms depends on their ability to bloom.
Bee cam.
Flowers are the plant's site for sexual reproduction. flowers are actually modified leaves which grow from shoots stimulated by hormones. The leaf-like sepals are located outside the flower's petals. Bright and fragrant, petals often form showy patterns to attract animal pollinators. Many flowers hold both male and female parts. In the male structures, a thin stalk called a filament supports an anther, which produces and stores the male gametes we find in pollen. The female reproductive parts consist of the stigma, a landing pad for pollen. The style, a tube-like connection of the stigma. And the ovary, which houses the egg-producing chambers known as ovules. Flowers vary considerably, but they've all adapted toward one purpose, to improve the odds of reproductive success.
Huh. A lot of flowers in that field.
It's a big bee.
That was a big flower.
There's the biggest flower in the world.
What?
Whoa. Is it the one that smells really bad?
Yes, it smells really bad. You want to see video footage of it?
Where is
Why
it?
wouldn't I want to see?
It's in the
people put it
rainforest.
Mr. Willis, I smell it.
One of the most extraordinary of these insect enticers lives here in the tropical rainforest of Sumatra. It only flowers once in 1,000 days, and when the flower develops, it only lasts for 3 days. So very few people have seen it. But here it is. Technically, it's a whole group of flowers clustered around this, but you can be justified for regarding it as one flower. And if you do that, well then, this is the biggest flower in the world. It's related to the dead horse arum, but it's 9 feet tall and 3 feet across. It's a Morphophallus titanum, the Titan arum. The function of this great spike in the middle is to produce a smell. And if you smell it, it smells very strongly of bad fish. This apparently attracts insects that come along here and go down into this great funnel to these small flowers that grow at the base. Until this film was taken, no one was sure what insect pollinated the Titan arum. As we watched, we saw that without doubt the job was done by tiny sweat bees. Like other arums, the male flowers form a band at the top. Below them, the female flowers with long yellow-tipped stigmas. The bees seem to find some reward on the stigmas, for they crawl all over them, distributing the pollen they brought with them. But why should the Titan arum produce the biggest bloom in the world to attract such tiny pollinators? To be effective, these bees must bring pollen from another bloom. But since the plant is rare and only flowers once in 3 years, the nearest may be miles away. It's not easy to spread perfume over such distances in the still, humid air of the rainforest. Perhaps the best way to do so is to disperse it from the top of a towering spire, like smoke from a factory chimney.
You could get one of those for your girlfriend or boyfriend for Valentine's Day. You said you smelled it?
Uh-huh.
Where'd you smell it?
The Fairchild Tropical Gardens, Miami.
Oh yeah? They had one blooming?
Mm-hmm.
Did it smell like bad fish?
Yep.
That's cool.
You said it smells like dead fish.
So you didn't see one, you just smelled it?
Oh, dead
You
flesh.
see it and you smell it. It's in
I've
front of
never
you.
smelled dead fish.
Is it about
You
that
didn't
size?
say you saw it, you just said you smelled it.
The one you saw, Leah, was about that size? Yeah.
Dead flesh.
Yeah.
Gross.
I don't know what that smells
You never killed a person, Alan Grace?
That smells like. Come on, Alan.
Okay, there's all sorts of variations of flowers. There's different sizes of flowers, like you just saw. It's different shapes, different colors, different petal arrangements, Ellen Grace.
Yeah. That's cool.
Sometimes flowers are pollinated by insects, and there's different types of pollinators. It's not just bees. There can be moths. There can be birds. Like a hummingbird is a pollinator for some flowers. There can be bat pollinated flowers, and the wind can blow pollen around just like it does in conifers. All grass plants, all grasses are flowering plants, but the wind distributes the pollen instead of insects. And like you were asking, was it Jay that was asking this? Some can self-pollinate themselves, and they actually don't pollinate other plants. But those are more rare. Pollination video.
Flowers have several adaptations that ensure pollination. Different anthophyte species have flowers of distinctive sizes, shapes, colors, and petal arrangements. Wind disperses lightweight oak pollen that can cause allergic reactions for many people. Tassels hang down and can wave in the wind. Hummingbirds are attracted to red flowers. The hummingbird's long beak reaches nectar at the base of this flower. Some yellow and orange pigments reflect light in ranges invisible to the human eye. Even so, the markings are highly visible to bees and other insects. As night falls, heavy scents and pale colors make it easier for moths to locate certain flowers. The carrion flower has a rancid odor that attracts fly and beetle pollinators. Nectar-producing flowers often attract insect pollinators as they seek food. Many of these adaptations relate to pollination.
Awesome.
And here are the pollen grains as seen under the electron microscope. Each pollen grain of each species has a different shape. And the different shape is used to attach to the different stigmas. The stigmas have different shapes, and the pollen grains fit to the stigmas like a key fits a lock. And the stigma will have a certain receptor shape, and the pollen grain has to fit in it. And so you can see some of the different pollen grains. We're going to, in the lab we do on Wednesday, we're going to have a flower, and we're going to cut it up, and we're going to look at the pollen grains under the microscope. Video footage of pollen grains.
The English summer fills our landscape with lovely flowers, but it comes at a price, hay fever. For those of us who suffer from it, and I most certainly do, our eyes swell, nose runs, and we get overcome with fits of uncontrollable sneezing. The source of our affliction is filling the air all around me, pollen grains.
No bigger than specks of dust, they're astonishingly varied and complex in shape. Each species of plant has its own characteristic pattern.
That's my favorite.
They're shed in millions from stamens that tumble out of the grass's tiny flowers. As the grains are released, so the wind carries them away. It's these tiny particles, when they get up our nostrils, that give so many of us such a bad time. But their proper destination, of course, is not the human nose. It's structures like these, the stigmas of other grass flowers. When a pollen grain carried by the wind happens to land on one of these feathery traps, a grass plant is fertilized and can then produce seeds which will grow into other grass plants.
Those are grass flowers. You may not have seen grass flowers anymore. If you go outside and you look at the grass, you're like, where are the flowers? The reason why you don't see the grass flowers on the grass outside is because we mow the grass before it gets long enough to produce flowers. If we didn't mow it for several months, it would eventually grow long enough to produce these little flowers. like it is in this field. More pollen video.
The pollen of each species of plant is as individual as a fingerprint. It must fit the physical and chemical features of the stigma as precisely as a key fits its lock.
I have a question, bro.
Yes.
They say it's gotta fit the stigma.
Yeah.
Is it that of that species or that specific plant?
Of that species.
Okay.
Each species has a different shape.
I guess I thought.
There's a bee getting some pollen.
Hey,
And this video shows kind of how the animals collect the pollen. A couple videos.
In many ways, they provide the cheapest and most efficient courier service of all. A plant like this Indian balsam can summon them with quite small, economically produced flowers. Each individual messenger, such as this bumblebee, will do its work for quite a modest payment of nectar. And the balsam constructs its flowers in a way that ensures that no one gets a drink without being given a load. It holds the nectar deep in the flower so that the bee has to go right inside to get it. The stamens hang from the roof of the entrance so that an arriving bee brushes them with its back.
The in-flower camera.
And when all the pollen has gone, the stamens loosen so that a departing messenger knocks them off. And that exposes the stigma, so that the next thirsty bee that arrives to collect a drink will make not a collection, but a delivery. Dozens of pollen grains get caught on the sticky stigma, many more than are needed. And when the flower's function is over, the petals fall. Then the egg chamber at the base of each flower quickly swells and becomes a capsule full of seeds. Many plants have found that it pays to have an exclusive courier service, so that a messenger doesn't deliver its package to the wrong address, a different kind of flower where it will be useless. This gentian, growing on the Cape in South Africa, has adopted that policy. The reward it offers to its employees is edible pollen, and carpenter bees pack great quantities of it into baskets on their legs. The stamens appear to be offering yellow pollen to all comers, but that is an illusion. These yellow structures are hollow tubes, and the pollen is secure inside. A beetle, attracted by the sight, is totally baffled. So, how do the bees manage to collect such large loads of pollen? Well, if you listen very carefully when one arrives, you could hear the answer. By vibrating more slowly than usual and making a deeper buzz, the bee shakes the tube with just the right frequency to make the pollen spurt out of a tiny hole at the top. And I can show the sort of vibrations required with this tuning fork. You might think that the long stigma projecting to one side would collect pollen sprayed around in such an extravagant way, but there's no danger of the flower fertilizing itself. The stigma doesn't become receptive until all the flower's own pollen has gone. There's an additional advantage with this strategy. A bee can't tell by sight whether a yellow stamen has pollen inside it or not. So those flowers which have no pollen left but newly receptive stigmas get a pollen delivery without having to pay for it.
Huh.
That's awesome.
And that brings me to something that you need to know about flowering plants. The ovary that houses the ovule, after the sperm have fertilized the eggs, after the pollen tube has grown, and the sperm go in here and fertilize the eggs, the center part of the ovule here, this part here, becomes a seed. And the ovary, this part here, develops into what we call a fruit. It swells up, often fills with sugars and water, and becomes big and thick. And so you have a fruit with seeds in the middle. That's what an apple is, or an orange, or a tomato. They all came from flowers. That's where fruits come from. Fruits come from flowers. And what happens is the petals fall off, and the style and stigma wither up, and you're just left with this fruit that has seeds inside it. And then eventually the fruit gets real heavy, falls off the tree. An animal might come and eat the fruit, and then the seeds go through the digestive system of the animal, and eventually the animal goes somewhere, it goes to the bathroom, and the seeds come out. And they're sitting in poop, which is fertilizer. And it helps the plant grow, it helps the seed grow. Isn't that amazing?
It's the coolest thing I ever heard.
That is the coolest thing you've ever heard.
Especially today.
Another video about pollination.
Yes.
As the bee goes round this flower collecting nectar, the pollen on the bee from another flower rubs off onto the sticky central part of this flower. This is pollination. Pollination is crucial in the sexual reproduction of flowering plants, as it is the way that the male sex cell inside the pollen is brought to the female sex cell contained in the center of the flower.
It's a horrible video.
That's flower sex. You've just watched it.
Come on.
Okay?
Okay.
Questions about flower sex?
Nope.
Now, we're not quite done. You need to turn to page 672. We need to talk about something else called photoperiodism. Photoperiodism is basically how plants know when to produce their flowers. When do you see most flowers produced? What part of the
Spring.
year? Spring. Usually in the spring the flowers come out. Why do you think that is? It's warm.
It's when the most rain comes.
The most what?
Rain.
There's a lot of rain. That's very good. Yes. Yes. There's a lot of insects around. How does the plant know that it's spring?
Photoperiodism.
It's something called photoperiodism. Photoperiodism is a way that plants know when it's spring, when it's time to flower. Now, not all plants flower in the spring. Some plants flower in the fall or winter, but most flower in the spring and summer. And the deal is, plants look at how many hours of daylight there is. And this is called photoperiodism. Plants have a way of seeing how long the day is. It's a special pigment that they have in their leaves. It's called phytochrome. And phytochrome is a chemical. When sun shines on it, it changes. And the plant can look at that chemical and see how much it's changed to see how long the day length is. And we basically are going to categorize, it's hard to say, we're going to categorize flowers into 4 different groups based on how they flower. And the first one is called a short day plant. Short day plant flowers when exposed daily to a number of hours of darkness that is greater than its critical period. So, number of hours of darkness greater than its critical period. The plant is waiting for a certain number of hours of darkness. Okay? Let's say the critical period is
What's the critical period?
8 hours. The critical period is a length of time.
The beginning of flower development for each plant species was in response to the range and number of hours of darkness. This range of hours is called a plant's critical period.
It's an amount of time.
Genius.
Let's say it's 10 hours. Let's say a plant sits there until it sees 10 hours of darkness or more. And if it sees 10 hours of darkness or more, it's going to flower. So that's called a short day plant. Because if it's a long night, then it's a short day. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So the plant is actually looking at the length of night. And it's kind of confusing. They call it a short day plant if it's a long night. So if the night is longer than some critical period, let's say it's 8, 10, 12 hours, then it'll flower. And we have long nights during the winter. So this is a winter flowering plant. A short day plant is a winter flowering plant.
Oh, good one.
Then you have long day plants. Long day plants are summer flowering plants or spring flowering plants. When the day gets longer, when the night gets shorter than this critical period, let's say again it's 12 hours. If the night gets shorter than 12 hours, that means the day is getting longer. And these long day plants flower when the number of hours of darkness is less than the critical period. And here you see short night, boom, flowers come out. Long night, no flowers. Most plants we see are long day plants. Intermediate day plants. Flowers as long as the number of hours of darkness is neither too great nor too few. So there's a number that it has to be between for the plant to flower. And if the night is too long, it won't flower, and if the night is too short, it won't flower. We call that intermediate day photoperiod. And then finally, there's day-neutral plants. Day-neutral plants don't care about the length of night or day. It doesn't matter to them. They flower as long as there's enough water or as long as the temperature's right. They look at something else. And so they might flower on a long night. They might flower on a short night. It just depends on something else. And a lot of times you'll find these things in the desert or something like that. A desert plant, it doesn't look at days or nights. If there's water around, it'll suck up the water and flower because there's only water comes so intermittently. So we call those day neutral, don't care about the length of the day. So those are the 4 types. Short day, and look, 4 choices, multiple choices. You see? Multiple choice test. Short day plants, flower when the day's short. Long day plants, flower when the day's long. Intermediate day plants, flower when the day is in the middle, not too short or not too long. Day neutral plants don't even care about the length of the day. Does that make sense?
Because day neutral.
It's neutral, it's day ambivalent. All right, so that is section 23.2. You read that tonight. It's only 6 pages. And there could be a quiz on that tomorrow. And then tomorrow we look at the life cycle. And then there's a lab on Wednesday. And Thursday is biography. And Friday is the test. Yes. Mr. Mullis. Well, you'll have to make yours up. Y'all can take it early or take it when you get back.
Willis out.
Willis out.